What makes a human being? There are many answers to this question. For some, it is his use of tools. For others, his complex language. The most prominent candidate for man's unique selling point, however, is his reason. But when we look at human beings in this way, one thing stands out. A large part of human culture is completely irrational. Whether we look at techno raves, baseball matches, Taylor Swift concerts, or New Year's Eve, none of this passes as rational behavior. And yet, music, dance, and ritual have always been an integral part of human culture. How do we explain this great persistence of nonsense? For the philosopher Susanne Langer, the human enterprise is not only about reason. Instead, Langer claims that humans are the only beings with an innate need to symbolize. Can this notion finally explain the weird conduct of our species, including this insanity we call baseball? In this video, we will try to answer this question by exploring the link between symbols and the human condition. According to Langer, symbolization is the most fundamental process of the brain. It never stops during our lives and is constitutive for all the ideas we have. Our brain constantly supplies us with images that we use to orient our thinking. The brain works as a transforming device that digests experiences and abstract ideas through the process of symbolization. This is distinctly human. According to Langer, animals are only capable of interpreting signs. Signs refer to something immediately present or following. The dog hears the keys on the door and takes this as a sign for the arrival of his owner. Humans, on the other hand, are characterized by the ability to think. Thinking is a cognitive function of abstraction. With this ability, we can detach our thinking from the immediate environment and direct it towards abstract ideas. However, in order to perform this complex operation, we need a tool. This tool is the symbol. A symbol functions as a carrier of meaning for abstract ideas. Unlike signs, symbols are free in their possible reference. By charging a symbol with an idea, we can anchor our abstraction symbolically in our present. In the form of the symbol, it remains accessible to us. Therefore, symbols make up the foundation of thought. The human need for language is already evident in infancy, when the child simply enjoys producing sounds by babbling and playing with its voice. Similarly, rites, dance, or music don't seem to have a practical use. Instead, they appear to be an outlet of spontaneous ideas. Symbolization, thus, seems to be an intrinsic human need. But what exactly is a symbol, and why do dance or music count as symbolic practices? The main idea of Langer's theory of mind is the distinction between discursive and presentational symbolism. Discursive symbolism refers to the domain of language and mathematics. It articulates meaning in sequentially ordered elements and refers to universally valid connotations. A definition of a blood cell, for example, applies equally to all blood cells. Discursive symbolism works by defining small units of meaning, which can then be combined according to syntactic rules to produce new semantic content. Due to their clear definition, discursive symbols can be translated without serious changes in meaning. However, this form of symbolism also has its limits. If these are exceeded, we find ourselves within the realms of the unspeakable. Here, the laws of presentational symbolism apply. The most accessible example of a presentational symbol is the picture. Here too, small units are at work, but they don't provide meaning autonomously. A certain color contrast doesn't mean anything by itself. That is because a presentational symbol does not consist of a combination of nameable elements. The color gradient and the shaping cannot be endlessly divided into defined units of meaning. And apart from this, these elements do not serve the purpose of sequential representation. They are not even neatly translatable into the elements of discursive language. The image only functions as a carrier of meaning in its entirety, or its Gestalt. Presentational symbolism can only be understood through the intricate relationships of the elements to each other within the holistic structure. But presentational symbolism does not exhaust itself in art. Since myth and poetry also rely on imagery, they too count as presentational symbolism. Although symbols appear succinct in form, their explication is often extensive, elaborate, and possibly inexhaustible. Symbols are often embedded in rich contexts and cross-references, rendering their meaning potentially boundless. These peculiarities of symbolic meaning are a characteristic feature of many cultural practices, including the visual arts, religion, and theater. In order to reveal the meaning of a symbolic form in an articulated way, it needs to be interpreted. A good example of this would be the mythological meaning of water. In the mythological tradition, water stands for life, creation, birth, and procreation. But as a metaphor for chaos and destruction, it also has an apocalyptic dimension. A flood ruthlessly washes things away, which is why it is generally considered a catastrophe. However, water also has a purifying aspect. Only when old structures are washed away can something new emerge. The baptismal water washes away the sins. A flood marks the end of one thing and a new beginning of something different. Those who want to escape the flood have two options: strengthening the dams or building an ark. Both require a vigilant eye for emerging chaos. With dams, you keep the chaos outside and maintain your conventional place of order. With the ark, one remains on top of the chaos and arrives safely at a new place. Under the surface of the water lurks the unknown, with all its dangers. If we are pulled down, we die, ending up in the underworld. This brief digression into the symbolic meaning of water only touches the surface of the matter, but it shows the meandering embeddings and complex cross-references constituting the symbolic terrain. Whenever water appears on the symbolic stage, it manifests this richness of meaning. Whether it is a baptism, a flood story, or even a sea monster. Only those who know the symbolic context of water can articulate the underlying meaning. The same matter occupied the philosopher Martin Heidegger, although from quite a different direction. He wondered how exactly human beings open up their situation, or how Heidegger calls it, their Dasein. Dasein is the term of the human being in distinction to, for example, the being of an animal. Under this term, he subsumes the particulars that distinctly govern human life. One of these is the constant drive to understand its circumstance. When describing the mechanics of this drive, he repeatedly mentions a circular dynamic. The concept of the circle is not coincidental with regard to the process of understanding, for it is a central figure in hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is a scholarly discipline that studies the mechanics of interpretation and understanding. According to Heidegger, Dasein possesses a hermeneutic essence. It revolves around ways of understanding and interpreting itself within the world and within history. In a Heideggerian sense, hermeneutics is therefore a form of existential self-interpretation. But at this point, things get strange. In order to understand one's own situation, Dasein must have already understood itself in a certain way. You can imagine it like reading an instructional manual. If I get a new washing machine, I already have a prior understanding of the device. Only with this basic understanding, the enclosed instructions become useful. But if I have never seen a washing machine before, it will be incomprehensible to me. Understanding your condition works the same way. It takes an implicit prior understanding of one's own situation to interpret it meaningfully. But doesn't this circle pose a problem? How am I supposed to understand myself if this understanding is goal and prerequisite simultaneously? As Heidegger writes, it is not a matter of avoiding or escaping this circle. On the contrary, it is about entering it in the right way. But how exactly do human beings enter this circle of understanding? At this point, we return to the use of symbols. They are an integral part in all forms of understanding. Man is integrated into a world of science and into a community that uses a common language. Symbols are carriers of meaning in which a symbolic condensation of meaning is contained. It seems that dealing with these symbols, man tries to become aware of his situation. Consequently, a convenient way to enter the circle of understanding seems to be through the engagement with symbolic forms. The thesis of this video is that symbolic forms provide a privileged access to the hermeneutic circle. This would explain the ubiquity of symbolic forms in our culture. For through constant engagement with such forms, Dasein would attempt to make its situation transparent to itself. So, how does this notion change our perspective on culture? Conveniently, the famous psychologist Carl Jung has already rethought culture along these lines. According to Jung, there are different spheres of knowledge. The first and narrowest area comprises our articulated knowledge. This includes treatises, tracts, systematizations, and the like. The second and much larger realm of knowledge contains our tacit knowledge. Here, we know just enough to express this knowledge in presentational symbols, but not enough to articulate it. It is the realm of art, narrative, and embodied representation. What remains is the last and largest area. It is the territory of the unknown, containing all yet undiscovered knowledge. With this model, we gain quite a different understanding of culture. The artist, for example, finds himself right at the transition between tacit knowledge and the unknown. He fishes within the deep seas of the unknown and tries to capture and express his all with symbolic means. In this process, he himself does not explicitly know what he is grappling with. He only knows that he got something on his hook. All artists, from Shakespeare to Picasso, have been like that. If they knew explicitly what they were discovering, they could simply tell us in words. But elaborately spelling out what they have captured is not their job. This is the business of the humanities, which deal with decoding the symbols of human culture. Thus, this field of tacit knowledge occupies an interesting position. For being located intermediately, it becomes an important interface between the known and the unknown. As already mentioned, symbols refer to rich meaning in a condensed form. They can represent something without the detour of articulation. Heidegger refers to such contents as foreconceptions. They contain already established meaning, which we cannot yet spell out properly. We know this phenomenon when we are immersed in a good movie. Movie plots are often fictitious and not like life at all. But there is something to them that captures our attention. Usually though, we cannot pinpoint this something. According to Heidegger's definition, foreconceptions initially lack interpretation and articulation. Consequently, their contents are inevitably bound to media that can bear meaning without articulation. Symbolic forms fulfill this criterion. Accordingly, symbols are agglomerations of foreconceptual knowledge. Like goods on a container ship, foreconceptions are tightly packed within symbolic practices. These dense contents then need to be unpacked, spread out, and opened up through the process of interpretation. You can think of symbols as cultural zip files. They are crammed with foreconceptual knowledge that only needs to be rolled out. What does this mean in practical terms? It changes our view of those cultural activities we hastily label as irrational and remote from facts. Dance is not a mere activity of individual preference, but it becomes a symbolic expression of unspoken meaning. The fact that both performing and even watching a dance can be so enjoyable indicates that there is much more to such things than we think. Balance, harmony, grace, unity of movement and rhythm. All these characteristics define dance as a symbolic practice. A good dance expresses values we highly appreciate. The same is true for sports. Whether it is baseball, basketball, hockey, or soccer. Sport is a symbolic stage for traits we value: determination, cooperation, innovation, and fairness. Surely we can also write books about these virtues. But they are best celebrated in the embodied act of these physical traditions. This is why millions of people enter a baseball stadium. They literally want to see their values at play. But it is not only contemporary culture shining in a new splendor. Most of human history operates within this symbolic domain. If we only measure our cultural heritage under modern terms, we are forced to render most of cultural history as primitive and incommensurate with science. Obviously, this is quite a presumptuous take on human history, and it deprives us of an understanding of most ancestral endeavors. This becomes most evident when we look at religious practices or primordial myths. The hero's journey, for example, symbolically embodies humanity in its struggle with surrounding forces of life. It is a mythological analysis of human problems from the real world, encoded within symbols of life, death, and transformation. These mythological narratives are interwoven in a dense network of common symbols, actors, and themes. Thus, a mythological overview of the human condition is built. For Langer, therefore, myth plays a significant role in human thought. As a complex achievement of presentational symbols, it forms the creative origins of metaphysics. When we approach culture with this understanding, new domains of meaning emerge from hitherto misunderstood behavior. Or, at least, we feel more sophisticated while attending our next baseball match.